The book of wisdom was penned well over 2,000 years ago, and it shows a great wisdom. 2,300 years later, we seem to have a world filled with foolishness rather than wisdom. The author looks at the created universe in its grandeur, its beauty, and everywhere he looks, whether it's the stars of the sky, the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, he sees the handiwork of God. And he's overwhelmed with a sense of God's power and creativity. And yet, though God is all-powerful, he also understands that God is incredibly lenient and loving. Yes, God does condemn evil in all of its forms, but that leniency and love of God is stronger than human weakness in the long run. Now he challenges, though, the believers, those who already have a faith in this great Creator God, to do something, to rebuke temerity, to cast out fear from their life. We're all afraid of death. We're afraid of illness. We're afraid of economic circumstances. That's part of the natural course of being a human being. We're human beings who are scaredy cats. But the more we rely on that God that set 800 million galaxies on their course and yet calls us by name, fear should be rebuked in our lives. You see right in our chapel here, do not be afraid, I am with you. That's part of the spirituality of Blessed Alberione and the Society of St. Paul and all the branches of the Pauline family. We have to let fear go so that we could get going in our spiritual journeys. Now, it's apparent that religion in the West is in a decline on every measurable scales. The number of people that go to church, the number of people that take religion seriously, etc. But we shouldn't be afraid of those numbers, because we have behind us the power of God that the author of wisdom knew so much about. Now, the secularists delight in that fact, that there's a decline in religiously oriented people. And in their imaginations, they think this is going to set humanity free from superstition. And we're going to make all types of human progress at every level, so that tomorrow will be glorious, more glorious than today. But, as a Gershwin tune once said, it ain't necessarily so. The Western civilization has been far from perfect. We could list all of the evils that have gone with it. But it was based on two elements: biblically based religions and Greek philosophy. And in Greek philosophy, the Greeks were convinced that if we really carefully look at reality, we could come to know the truth. And the truth would be conformity of mind to reality. Well, that's gone out the window. Now truth is anything you want it to be. You could stand the truth on its head. You could call bad good, good bad. And then, with the decline in the practice of Christianity, we have another problem. Christianity contributed to the arts, to the sciences, to eventually finding a whole new way of organizing human society based around democracies and representative governments, and giving people political freedom based ultimately on the truth that real rights come from God and not from the state. And this produced a great Western civilization. With that in decline, the secularists should be alarmed, not delighted, because we could have a dystopia in the future when right and wrong is determined only by political expediency and politicians. In the future, who knows what darkness will descend on the world. But as believers, we do not despair. We are filled with the Spirit of God that groans within us, helping us pray in ways we can't even imagine. The secular world is becoming more and more dispirited. So now in our culture around us, we see a sense of low-grade depression wherever we look. There's moments of happiness, but not a civilization of joy. The scientists are still making great advances, but if we look at cultures that were based on atheism in recent times, the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, you don't find any great advances in science except in the space area, which was an offshoot of their military programs. But you don't really find great advances in medicine, in physics, and chemistry coming out of those types of civilization, because the human imagination has been shriveled, shrunken. While in a believing culture, the imagination expands and expands, and all things are possible. Centuries ago, when Christianity dominated, the artists like J.S. Bach would write on everything he wrote for the greater honor and glory of God. Beethoven would compose an ode to joy. Now we might say, oh, an ode for, whatever. And there would not be that ascendance in the arts themselves. And I'm one that loves French Impressionism, a lot of early modern art, but it's gone down generation after generation without a God above for the artists to dedicate their lives to. 20 years ago, I went to the Carnegie Mellon Museum, a beautiful museum in the modern art section. I was staring at a mattress on a floor with a melon a cantaloupe in the center. And it said Opus 107. And well, the guy was a great artist, a con artist. But it shows what happens when the arts become the God unto themselves. You have somebody walking down the street dressed in meat saying, I'm an artist, I'm an artist. But when the artists put themselves at the service of God, their imaginations soar. And the same with the scientists, etc. We pray for the soul of the West. Now, the poor people of the world have not lost touch with God. So you see in Asia, you see in Africa, and various parts of the world, a hunger for God and a manifestation of the Spirit as never seen before. So we as believers keep up our enthusiasm. The Greek word means to be filled with God. If we're not filled with God, well, we might be filled with a variety of lunch meats like bologna. And so we have a challenge to be enthusiastic people and allow the Spirit of God to groan within us. All of us are called to be mystics. If Christianity is to revive the West, the Christians have to be mystics. We have to allow God more and more to dominate our hearts, our minds, our imaginations, and our capacity to love our neighbors. And when that happens, we become living parables for a world that's hungering for the truths of God.